Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Thoughts at 3 online assembly. My name is Ellie, and normally, when I'm not a pirate, I am part of the schools team at Southampton City Mission. We would normally be spending our days in schools in and around the Southampton area, where we will be doing question of faith days with a year group on a topic, or even doing assemblies. Now, obviously, we can't be doing that at the moment, but that is why we are coming to you live every day at 3 o'clock on YouTube or on Facebook to do an online assembly that we are calling Thoughts at 3. Now, most of you might be wondering why on earth I am dressed as a pirate today. Well, that is because it links to our topic for today, which is all to do with stories. I love stories, particularly ones which involve pirates or treasure or adventure. And today's story comes from the Bible, and it is going to be all to do with a treasure hunt. So what I want you to do is get involved. We have a live chat which we can see and even put your comments up on the screen. So if you are watching along live today, make sure you come and say who you are, where are you watching, who are you watching with, but also any questions you might have about the topic today, stories. So, pirates. There isn't actually any pirates in the Bible, at least not in the story I'm telling today, but it is to do with treasure. But there are actually loads of stories in the Bible. I've got one of my Bibles with me today. This is the Jesus Storybook Bible. And you know, at Southampton City Mission, we like to use this one, as well as lots of other versions of the Bible to help tell stories. But did you know the Bible is actually not just one book? It's actually 66 books that have all been put together. But together, they do make one story. And you can see that story kind of showing us a journey all the way through the Bible. That story is a love story, believe it or not. It is the story about God's love for people, for the people that God created. Now, in the Old Testament, that's the first part of the Bible, the part that Jewish people and other religions still use as their holy text. In the Old Testament, we can hear all about God creating the world, about that love for people, and there are even some clues and hints in the Old Testament about Jesus. But really, if we want to find out more about Jesus, we look to the New Testament. That's the second part of the Bible. And that tells us all about Jesus' life, Jesus being God's son, how he came to earth, and how he died. But also how that wasn't the end of the story and how he came back to life again. So that we could be connected with God. And that love story continues, how we can be in a relationship with God because he loves us so much. Now, in the Bible, there are stories about Jesus, but there are also stories that Jesus told. And we call these parables. When Jesus was here on earth, he told stories to lots of people that were listening, and it was used to help them understand some of the teachings, some of the lessons and messages that Jesus was trying to share. Now, if you were watching Thoughts at 3 back in the Easter holidays, Matt and I did a whole week on parables, and you can hear some of our favourite ones shared then. Things like the Good Samaritan, the wise and foolish builders, and a few others. Well, today we're going to be telling you one more of those parables, one of those stories that Jesus told. But first, I'm going to go to the comments and see who is watching. We've got Jordan, who's very excited that Pirate Ellie is here today. This is not how I usually look, but he started to ask some questions as well. We might have time to answer those later. But I also want to say hello to Harriet and Alex, who are watching from Hedge End. Hello, Harriet and Alex. I'm glad you like my pirate hat. I think it's actually called a tricorn, something to do with 3 points, try anyway. So hello to you, I hope you are enjoying it. I think it is about time that we told this story then. If you have any questions as we're going along, put them in the comments. We would love to answer them after. Today's story comes from the Jesus Storybook Bible, which is written by Sally Lloyd-Jones, and it is called Treasure Hunt. One day, Jesus was telling people about God's kingdom. God's kingdom is wherever God is. Wherever God is king, Jesus told them. It's wherever God is in charge. It's where he fills your heart up with forever happiness, and you stop running away from him and you love him. But sometimes people couldn't understand things very well. So Jesus helped them by telling them stories called parables. Jesus said, God's kingdom is like a hidden treasure. And then he told them this story. Once upon a time, there was a man working in a field, digging. So there he is digging. But what he doesn't know is that in that field, there is buried treasure. Ah! So dig, 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 clink, clonk, clonk. Uh-oh, his shovel bumps into something hard. Hello, what's this? He picks it up, dusts it off. It's a chest. It's a rusted and locked, but creak. He pries it open. What he sees inside takes his breath away. Beautiful, glittering, gleaming, twinkling, sparkling, precious jewels. It's a treasure chest. He wants that treasure. He needs to get that treasure. He must have that treasure somehow, even if he has to sell everything he has so he can pay for it. He quickly buries the treasure again, runs home and sells everything he has. He takes the money from the sale and goes and buys that field. Now he owns the field and the treasure that is buried in it. He runs back and digs up the treasure again. Jesus said, coming home to God is as wonderful as finding treasure. You might have to dig before you find it. You might have to look before you see it. You might even have to give up everything you have to get it. But being where God is, being in his kingdom, that is more important than anything else in all the world. It's worth anything you have to give up, Jesus told them, because God is the real treasure. God had a treasure too, of course, a treasure that was lost long, long ago. What was God's treasure? His most important thing, the thing that God loved best in all the world? God's treasure was his children. It's why Jesus had come into the world, to find God's treasure and pay the price to win them back. And Jesus would do it, even if it cost him everything he had. I hope you enjoyed that story. So, turns out maybe it wasn't really about pirates looking for treasure after all. Maybe I'm wearing my pirate costume as a mistake. But do you know what? I do love that parable that explains how actually God is better than any kind of treasure a pirate could find, because God is the best prize. And we might have to give things up to find it, but it is worth more than anything. Now, we're going to spend a bit of time answering your questions now. I'm going to invite Matt, one of the other team leaders at Southampton City Mission, to come and join me as we ask and answer these questions. If you do have any questions, make sure you put them in the comments below. Let's see if Matt is ready to join us. Yaha, my hearty Matt.
Yo ho ho. And a bottle of milk or something. Yes. Good afternoon, Ellie. How are you doing?
It sounds good. I'm very well, thank you. So we are going to have a go at answering some questions, some of the frequently asked questions we normally get in schools when we talk about stories. And actually, some of these questions come from an assembly we did a few weeks ago, which was also about the stories Jesus told, but we didn't quite have time to answer all of them. So the first question is this. It says, who did Jesus tell stories to? Well, the answer to that one is actually the people. Jesus was telling stories to the crowds that were there listening at the time. It wasn't just those that were in the temple or, there who were learning all the religious things. No, actually, Jesus, he would gather on hilltops or in a boat by a lake. It was where the people were. But what I also like to think is that Jesus didn't just tell these stories to the people that were living and listening 2,000 years ago. I think these stories are extremely relevant for us today. And these stories are actually for anyone and everyone who wants to hear them. Would you agree with that, Matt?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. So, Matt, I have a question for you here, which is one we often get asked when we talk about Bible stories. And
Okay.
it's, what is your favourite story in the Bible?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many great stories in the Bible that I can think of. I've mentioned Balaam's donkey before, that story about God making a donkey talk. I often think if God can use a donkey, then he could definitely use me. But I think probably the one that I'm most fond of is the story of, I think, is it Moses, who is asked by God to go and rescue the people of Israel from Egypt. Is that right? Is that Moses?
I believe so.
Yeah, good. Just making sure. He grows up in the Egyptian palace, and even though he's actually an Israelite, and he has all the privileges assigned to him that an Egyptian prince would have, but he makes some bad choices, and he ends up isolating himself out in the wilderness, looking after sheep. And then one day God appears to him in the form of a burning bush, which actually wouldn't be uncommon in those times because the desert was so hot. Bushes, trees would actually catch on fire quite often. But this one was unusual because the fire was not making the tree burn up. The tree was still there, the bush was still there, even though it was on fire. And God spoke to Moses through this bush and told him to go and rescue the people of Israel from the Egyptians. And Moses sort of says, "No, look, who am I to do that? I'm nobody. I'm just insignificant. I've made bad choices. I can't really speak well to a crowd." And he makes all these different excuses. He's like, I stutter. I've got this speech impediment. I can't. Surely you mean somebody else. And eventually, he gives in and does what God is asking him to do with the help of his brother Aaron, and the plagues that God sends against the Egyptians who have got his people trapped. And ultimately, Moses ends up leading his people out of slavery and into the promised land where they were meant to be living all that time. And I think it's just a great story because it shows that even though we may have made wrong choices in our lives, actually God can still use us. That's what Christians believe. But actually a lot of the different leaders of God's people are people who have made mistakes, who just, they're not superheroes. They're not people who are perfect or have got everything right, but they're people who struggle with the same sorts of things as you and me. And it's also a story of redemption, of rescue, which obviously, not obviously, but ultimately is what the story of the Bible is about. We just heard there in your story of the hidden treasure of God wanting to rescue his treasure, his children. And so I think it's a story within a story. And it shows us that God's heart is for redemption, is for rescue, is for setting people free. And actually, you might be able to see behind me on the wall, I've got one of my favorite slogans from the Bible, which is, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." So, yeah, I think that's probably my favorite story in the Bible. At least that's what I'm going to tell you today.
That's a brilliant answer. It makes me want to read the story of Moses again, or maybe watch the film.
I would say great version to watch, which we went to watch when we were in the States, is the version by Sight and Sound. They are a theatre company based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and I went to see Moses in the theatre there. It's a full 180-degree wraparound stage, and yeah, live animals, and it's just an absolutely phenomenal performance. So if you can get that, yeah, I think it's available on DVD or online to stream from Sight and Sound. That is a version I would really recommend watching.
That sounds brilliant. Maybe after we've gone live, we can put that in the comments so people can try and find it. That'd be fantastic. Well, I think that is a really good answer. I'm trying to think of what my favourite Bible story is. Do you know, I love lots of the New Testament, all of those stories of Jesus. I've talked before about I love it when he calms the storm. I love some of the other miracles he does, like when he heals the blind man. But actually, one of my favourite all-time stories in the Bible is the story of creation. It's right at the beginning of the Bible. It's the story that Christians believe shows how God created the world, how he did that in kind of 7 parts and with all the animals and the plants and the seas and the skies. And I think I like that story so much because it just shows me what God is like. It shows me how creative he is, which I, as you know, love kind of arts and crafts and being creative. And I always like to think that, you know, makes me a bit like God. He's given me those skills because he's a creative God as well. And it also reminds me of what the world is supposed to be like. It was so beautiful at the beginning, and we know it's not always like that now. We've kind of messed up, but it's a reminder of what it will be like one day. And for Christians, we believe that actually this isn't the end. Creation, there will be a new heaven and a new earth after Jesus comes back. So for me, the creation story is a brilliant one and my favourite.
Great.
But we do have some more questions coming in. So going to the comments, I can see we've got a question from Harriet, which is kind of flipping that one on its head. Oh, I think that's the link for the play you were talking about. We'll have a look at that in a moment. But Harriet would like to know, what is your least favourite story in the Bible and why? Do you know, I think I have an answer for this, so I can share mine with some more thinking time.
To think.
I do love lots of the Bible. And like you said, there's loads of really cool stuff in there, from burning bushes to talking donkeys to miracles and floods and lots of adventure and exciting stuff. But some of the Bible is a little bit trickier to read. And that might be because it sounds a bit boring. For example, I know that in the Bible, there is sometimes some lists. Like at the beginning of some of the Gospels that we've talked about before, there is the list of Jesus's family, and it talks about all of his ancestors and the line, the family tree that Jesus came from. And to be honest, for me, that's a bit of a boring read because it is just a name after a name after a name after a name, and it's not as exciting as some of the other things. But although I say it's my least favourite, I do know it is still exciting and important because actually that shows that whole big picture I was talking about. Although the Bible is split into those 66 books, actually it shows that Jesus was always a part of God's plan from the beginning. So much so that all of those Old Testament characters were related to each other and all descendants or ancestors of Jesus. So it might be a little bit boring to read, but it is still interesting at the same time. What about you, Matt? Is there anything that maybe is not so exciting in the Bible for you?
Well, it's maybe not that it's not exciting, but I think having had a little time to think, Harriet, I think that actually one of the things that I don't particularly like reading about is death. And so there's lots of stories actually in the Bible where people die, including obviously the most famous story in the Bible, which is Jesus dying on the cross, which Christians believe was the best thing to ever happen. But it's a difficult story to read and to watch, to listen to. So maybe not my least favorite, but one of the ones that I don't like necessarily hearing is of Jesus dying, or anyone dying, in fact. But tomorrow, kind of just as a little plug, I will be doing an online assembly all about death ceremonies and thinking more about this idea of death and what happens next. So hopefully that gives you an answer to that question, Harriet.
Thank you very much, Harriet. I really hope we have managed to answer your questions there. And yeah, Matt, so you are going to be joining us tomorrow for all about death ceremonies. Is there anything else you can tell us about that?
I might be throwing in an illusion.
Always exciting.
Yeah, special pack of cards.
That does sound good. So make sure you do join us tomorrow, or join Matt tomorrow, for the topic all on death ceremonies. And if you do have any questions that you would like Matt to answer, then why don't you comment them on this video or comment them on tomorrow's video, which we will post out soon. And we would love to answer any of those in tomorrow's assembly at 3 o'clock, all on death ceremonies. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. We will see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
So that is nearly the end of our Thoughts at 3 today. But there is one more thing that I do want to tell you about, which is actually something for Friday's assembly, which is going to be another craft special. So if you like getting involved with some crafts, on Friday, we are going to be doing some stone decorating. This follows on from last week's assembly, which Matt did all about stones and the symbols that they are. So if you want to get involved, my challenge for you is this: can you start collecting some pebbles, collecting some stones? I went out into my garden this morning. They don't have to be big. I've just found a few and I've started to wash them so that on Friday, I'm going to be ready to decorate these. So if you want to get involved, start having a look for some stones and you can join me for that on Friday. But for now, I want to remind you about joining Matt tomorrow for that assembly all about death ceremonies. And I also want to say thank you for joining me today. I'm just going to check the comments one more time. We've had Lucy sharing all about that Jesus story on stage, or the Moses story on stage. We will make sure we put those links up. Hello also to Rebecca, who is watching, who's just read about the story of Moses in the book of Exodus. So she's definitely going to try and check out that play as well. I'm sorry if we didn't get time to answer your questions today, but make sure you join us tomorrow at 3 o'clock, where Matt will be leading our next Thoughts at 3. See you then. Bye.